Hello there! In this episode we'll be talking about the Portuguese Crisis of 1383 to 1385, a turbulent time in the Hundred Years' War when Portugal didn't have a king upon its throne and Castile, weak from a civil war, was trying to put a Castilian king on it. From the start of the 14th century and up to the 1350s, Europe had suffered a big economic crisis. To make it all worse, in the 1340s the plague came along and killed millions of people. Furthermore, multiple wars were taking place in Europe. The French were fighting the English and the English were fighting the Scots. In the Iberian Peninsula, Castile was at war with Aragon and with itself, with one side being backed up by France and the other by England. All these conflicts helped the military development to grow on all sides, and these will be showcased in Portuguese Crisis of 1383 to 1385. So let's start with the Castilian Civil War. King Pedro I of Castile was fighting his half-brother and claimant to the throne, Enrique of Trastamara. Pedro's side was backed by England and Enrique's side was backed by France and Aragon. Yes, the same Aragon with which Castile was at war with. In 1369, after 18 years of fighting, Enrique of Trastamara killed Pedro in a castle south of Madrid, thus winning the civil war and ending the war with Aragon. His next action was to cancel the Castilian alliance with England and starting a new one with France. Meanwhile, in Portugal, in January 1367, King Pedro I of Portugal died, not to be confused with Pedro of Castile. His son and heir to the throne, Fernando, became king and would take Portugal to a whole other direction in the way it will be ruled. But before we go into that, we need to talk about a bit the Portuguese royal family. Dom Pedro I of Portugal, keeping up with European royal traditions, had of course a mistress. And with this mistress he had a son named João. So this makes the future king, King Fernando, and João half-brothers. João was the Grand Master of the Order of Aviz, therefore he was also known as the Master of Aviz. This is important to know as he will play an important role further in the video. Portugal and Castile had always had close bonds to each other. More often than not, Portugal's queens were Castilian and Castile's queens were Portuguese. King Pedro's mother was a Castilian and so was Fernando's mother. This wasn't the case for Dom João's mother, who was a Portuguese and daughter of a simple merchant. This will become helpful for him in the future. After the victory of Enrique, many Castilian nobles who had been on the defeated side fled to Portugal. Here the Castilian nobles convinced the young King Fernando to lay claim to the Castilian throne. King Fernando was the great-grandson of King Sancho IV of Castile, so he could actually claim the Castilian throne. King Enrique of Castile was too, but he was a bastard child and a legitimate son, meaning he wasn't really supposed to ever sit on the throne. In 1369, King Fernando started what would later become known as the First Fernandine War. Not what you'd call excess, and he ended up signing a treaty in 1371 where he gave up his claim to the Castilian throne. This wasn't enough for the Portuguese king though, as he went to war again in 1372, when John of Gaunt, the English Duke of Lancaster, who was married with a Castilian princess, tried to do the same as Fernando had done 1 year earlier, and laid claim to the Castilian throne. But before Portugal and England were even ready to attack, the Castilian forces were already at the gates of Lisbon. A peace treaty was made where Portugal was forced to support Castile and France fight England in the Hundred Years' War. In June 1373, an alliance was formed between Portugal and England, which broke the Portuguese promise to Castile and France. For Portugal, it was important to have an ally from the area around the English Channel, so Portuguese trade ships could reach the Flemish and German ports without being raided. For England, it meant a safe place to disembark its troops in the Iberian Peninsula. Yet again, in 1381, after the death of King Enrique, the Duke of Lancaster yet again saw an opportunity to seize the Castilian throne, and Portugal decided to help. This war would then become known as the Third Fernandine War. As the other wars, this war would be a short one, ending just a year after. In 1383, a third and important treaty was signed. In this treaty, King Fernando I of Portugal agreed on the marriage of his daughter Beatriz of Portugal with King Juan I of Castile. As King Fernando's intentions were to form a union of the kingdoms of Portugal and Castile, rules were applied. The most important rules of the treaty were the Cortes, which were a symbol of nobles, were the only power to allow Portugal and Castile to unite. The next king of Portugal will be the son of Beatriz and Juan I. If Beatriz died without an heir, Juan I of Castile would become King of Portugal, and until Beatriz and Juan I had a son, Queen Leonor d'Elche would be regent of Portugal. The treaty was respected, and Juan and Beatriz got married in May 1383. This marriage was very controversial amongst the Portuguese nobility, but King Fernando made sure to specify that if he died without an heir, the current Queen of Portugal, Leonor d'Elche, would be regent until Princess Beatriz had a 14-year-old son. This was so Juan I of Castile couldn't take the Portuguese throne. But in October 1383 disaster hit. King Fernando of Portugal died of tuberculosis. From then on, the country was left in the hands of the Queen, who let herself get a little too much help from her lover, the Count of Orange. During King Fernando's reign, the Portuguese people suffered a lot of wars. But good things came out of them as well. Examples would be the alliance with England that would shape the country's history for centuries to come. The multiple reforms amongst which was the construction of the Fernandine walls. These walls were fortifications in Porto, Torres Novas, Elvas, Santarém, Beja, Ponte Lima, and most important of all, in Lisbon. The regency of Queen Leonor d'Elche angered both Portuguese nobility and the population in general. As he heard the news about King Fernando's death and the angry nobles, King Juan I of Castile and his wife Beatriz acclaimed themselves rightful King and Queen of Castile and Portugal, ignoring what was written in the Treaty of 1383. In Portugal, João, the master of Aviz and half-brother of Fernando, laid claim to the throne as well. The country was now divided. One side, those supporting the regent Queen Leonor d'Elche and King Juan I and his Queen Beatriz. These were mostly the elite of Portuguese and Castilian nobility, backed up by the clergy. On the other side was the master of Aviz, who was supported by the lower nobility of Portugal, most of whom were bastard children with no further political rise. They all shared a common hatred of Castile, and with reason. They had suffered in the past decades in King Fernando's wars. Alongside these nobles was the majority of the population as well, bourgeois and peasants alike. There was also a tiny third faction supporting João de Castro, the child of King Pedro I and his lover Inês de Castro. But he didn't have much support from anyone, so he won't be of much importance to us. In December 1383, supporters of the Master of Aviz rose up against the regency in Lisbon. They killed the pro-Castilian Bishop of Lisbon and the Count of Orange, Queen Leonor d'Elche's lover, who had a bit too much influence with matters of state. And like that, Lisbon got on Dom João's side. Later, this gets known as the Revolution of 1383. The Master of Aviz then sent an envoy to Leonor d'Elche, who was in a castle just north of Lisbon, where he asked her to marry him so they could be regents together until Beatriz had a 14-year-old son. This would make it impossible for Castile to annex Portugal. Leonor d'Elche arrogantly rejected this offer for the simple reason that she didn't really want to share her power. She then sent an envoy to Juan I of Castile asking him for military support to get the situation straight again and secure her own regency. Juan I didn't wait around, and in January 1384 he marched into Portugal with a great Castilian army. By the 12th of January he was in Santarém. There he forced Leonor d'Elche to transfer the regency powers to him. He also stayed there while waiting for his armada to reach the Tejo estuary, so he could lay siege all around Lisbon. Meanwhile, the Master of Aviz kept expanding his influence by conquering towns and castles. He also asked for help from England against Castile and their French allies. Informed of the Castilian activity in the Alentejo region, the Master of Aviz nominated a young noble, Nuno Alves Pereira, as constable of the army in Alentejo. Nuno Alves Pereira was one of the sons of the Grand Master of the Portuguese Order of Hospitallers. He was very religious, highly educated, and most important of all, he knew how to fight. He was well read in the latest military tactics, fresh off the battlefields of the 100 Years' War. He was given 1,200 soldiers in Lisbon, mostly small merchants and peasants or labourers that he instantly marched towards Évora with. There the army was heartily welcomed by the locals. He quickly got news of a Castilian invasion of northern Alentejo, which aimed to reach the pro-Castilian town of Crato. He then sent messages to all counties in Alentejo asking for support, but most didn't bother to answer, and he only managed to get some 300 soldiers more. With around 1,500 soldiers he marched to Estremoz, which is around 60 kilometers south of Crato. In Estremoz he rallied some locals to join his force and then marched on to a town called Fronteira. At this time the Castilians had already reached the castle of Crato. In the fields around Fronteira he was approached by a squire who, on behalf of the Castilian general, tried to convince him to join their side and stop the suicidal attack. Nuno Alves refused several times and marched on. The 6th April 1384, at the estate of Oliveira, over 1,000 Castilian knights and 3,000 infantrymen appeared over the horizon. The Portuguese became anxious. 1,500 armed peasants faced an army over 3 times their size. Seeing the under-equipped army, the 1,000 Castilian knights charged. However, Nuno Alves Pereira had positioned his troops in a way that in order to make contact, the Castilians would have to cross the creek. This tactic worked perfectly as it was muddy around the creek, making it hard for the horses and soldiers to march quickly. Many knights and soldiers never reached the Portuguese lines due to the crossbowmen raining bolts upon them. Those who came close enough were met with a wall of spears. Realizing the battle was lost, the Castilians retreated. At the end of the day, 600 Castilians had fallen, while on the Portuguese side the casualties were very low. This battle stopped a full-fledged invasion of the Alentejo region. This was bad for King Juan I, as his plan was to get more nobles in the Alentejo region to support him and have a secure path from Castile to Lisbon. Only a month later, in May 1384, King Juan I of Castile decided the next thing to do should be besiege Lisbon. Inspired by his father, Juan I marched through the undefended areas of Portugal with an enormous army and had his armada sailed from Seville to Lisbon. Until now he had only suffered one big defeat and was already under 100 kilometers away from the Portuguese capital. Meanwhile in Lisbon, the Master of Aviz was in luck. King Fernando I had rebuilt Lisbon's walls not so long ago, so all he had to do was construct some lighter defences outside the wall. The armada in Lisbon consisted of around 10 ships who were being repaired and refitted, and further 35 ships had been ordered to Lisbon from Algarve and Porto. King Juan I, having his powerful armada of 53 ships anchored outside Lisbon, laid siege to the city. But he had a big obstacle than his father ever had, the Fernandine Wall, the brand new 8-meter high wall stretching for 5 kilometers with 80 towers, just finished a few years earlier. This didn't scare him though. The confident king had his troops surround Lisbon and intended to starve out the Portuguese instead. The 17th July 1384, the Portuguese armada from Algarve and Porto reached Cascais, a town 20 kilometers away from Lisbon. The 35 ships anchored at the Bay of Cascais, carrying many supplies and around 4,000 soldiers. The Master of Aviz ordered his ships to anchor at Lisbon, so the battle needed supplies and soldiers could get into Lisbon. The next day, the 18th of July, the Portuguese ships did as ordered and set sail to Lisbon. 6 Castilian ships intercepted the first Portuguese ships entering the estuary. 3 of the Portuguese ships were lost, but the rest of the Portuguese armada managed to go around without giving a battle. This was due to the other Castilian ships didn't attack the rest of the Portuguese. It is still unknown why. This push through the blockade allowed Lisbon to be resupplied with men and food. Few hours later, the Master of Aviz fled the city by boat so that he could reorganize an army outside Lisbon. Some days later, a second Castilian armada came to the one stationed around Lisbon as reinforcement. Weeks passed and hygiene was not a priority, and an outbreak of the plague was unavoidable. This killed many inside the walls and spread to the Castilians standing outside the wall as well. After 4 months of siege and many casualties on the hand of the plague, the lack of hygiene and the continuous raids made about Portuguese, King Juan I gave up. The siege was lifted on the 3rd September 1384, and King Juan I marched with his battered army back the way he came from. The Castilian armada, though, sailed back to Seville in late October. Since the Castilian armada had left the estuary, the Master of Aviz went to Alentejo to help Nuno Alves Pereira in conquering castles and towns still in favour of Castile. In February 1385, the Master of Aviz laid his sword and went into politics. Portugal needed a king who could unite the Portuguese nobility and the population in general to fight the Castilians. While the Castilian army was reorganizing in Castile, many Portuguese nobles met in Coimbra to elect a new king. All the attending nobles agreed upon that Queen Leonor d'Elge, King Juan I and Queen Beatriz had lost their rights to the Portuguese throne. mainly due to the fact that they were trying to take it by force. Several nobles wanted King Pedro's dynasty to continue, so they supported João de Castro as the new king. However, João de Castro had also used Castilian help for his military actions, which wasn't really popular for many nobles. The majority favored Dom João de Master of Aviz, as he had fought the Castilians for a long time and had valuable military and diplomatic supporters. The 6th April 1385, the Master of Aviz was elected as King João I of Portugal, thus ending the Afonso dynasty and starting the Aviz dynasty. This election didn't end the war or the split between nobles in Portugal, but it was a start to solve the problems. In April and May, King João I and Nuno Alves Pereira went on a military campaign in northern Portugal with about 7,000 soldiers to take back the rest of the towns and castles still loyal to Castile. In the meantime, 640 English soldiers arrived in Lisbon and Porto. In Castile, King Juan I was making plans to invade Portugal yet again, this time on 3 different fronts. In late April 1385, the Castilian Armada was back to blockading Lisbon. In northern Portugal, a raiding army of around 800 men was harassing the towns and cities, but they had gathered so much loot, livestock and prisoners they decided to go back to Castile and reorganize. On their way back, in late May, they were met by 500 Portuguese knights and soldiers assembled by local nobles. They tried to go around them, but the small Portuguese force followed and attacked. It ended with a Portuguese victory, and all the loot and livestock was retaken and the prisoners were released. Meanwhile, King Juan I entered Alentejo besieging Elvas, but decided to retreat after just 1 month of siege. These campaigns were further humiliations for the Castilian king, who had had nothing but bad luck since the start of this war. In June 1385, King Juan assembled an enormous army at Ciudad Rodrigo. On the 2nd week of July he marched towards Lisbon from the north, with around 30,000 soldiers, 2,000 of which were young French knights, who wanted an opportunity to show their strength and valor in the field of battle. Every castle and town on the way of King Juan, Almeida, Pinhel, Trancoso, Solurico, Coimbra, Sor, Pombal and Leiria, fell to his mighty army. At this time, King Juan was becoming ill, so he had to give most of the command to his generals. Meanwhile, the Master of Aviz and Nuno Alves Pereira had marched to Alentejo in early summer to fight King Juan at Elvas, but as he had retreated back to Castile, they stopped at Abrantes, waiting for further information. Having spies all over Portugal, the Master of Aviz got the news of the Castilian army crossing the border as soon as it happened. Knowing that Lisbon couldn't resist another siege, the Master of Aviz wanted to get the battle away from Lisbon. With more intelligence coming in, he could predict the roads the Castilian army would use. In early August, he marched to Portimão, a little town with a castle, where he predicted the Castilians would pass. On the early morning of the 14th August 1385, almost 6,500 Portuguese soldiers marched from Portimão to a field 5 kilometers away, which Nuno Alves Pereira had chosen. Once there, they formed up almost the same way they had at the battlefield of Atlejo, between 2 creeks facing north. The Castilian king and generals, learning from the mistake at Atlejo, didn't cross the creek, but ordered the 30,000 soldiers to go around. Nuno Alves Pereira had predicted this and had already made some traps to the south. Watching the Castilians marching around, the Portuguese army marched south too. Once both armies were positioned, both waited for the other to attack. A bit past 6 in the afternoon, 2,000 young French knights charged at full gallop against the Portuguese vanguard, but quickly fell to the many Portuguese traps and the Portuguese crossbowmen firing upon them. If they hadn't died yet, then they had to dismount due to the many obstacles in the way. Those who miraculously reached the Portuguese vanguard were taken as prisoners, and like that, after just half an hour, the Portuguese found themselves with more than 1,000 French prisoners on their hands. The Castilians then sent their knights, who breached one of the Portuguese flanks, but were surrounded and butchered. The rest of the Castilian army, watching how nearly 4,000 knights were butchered in a matter of hours and how the surviving ones ran, lowered their morale drastically, which made many to desert. Watching his army being butchered and deserting, the ill King Juan I was escorted to Santarém by 100 knights so he wouldn't be taken as prisoner, leaving his army behind. After the battle, the Portuguese army marched to Alcobaça, where the dead would be buried in a mass grave and the soldiers would rest and the wounded will be treated at the monastery of Alcobaça. The Portuguese took 5,000 prisoners and had killed between 4,000 and 5,000 Castilians and French. Some of the prisoners were killed as well, since the Portuguese army couldn't manage and control as many prisoners as they had men. It's estimated that Portuguese casualties didn't even reach 1,000, though many were severely wounded and probably died days later. But the bloodshed wasn't over yet. Many Castilian soldiers were killed in the villages and towns on their way back to Castile. It's estimated further 5,000 Castilians were killed trying to get back to their homes. Around half of the 30,000 Castilians managed to return to Castile. To keep the Castilians away, the Master of Aviz ordered Nuno Alves Pereira to march into Castile. In October 1385, 90 kilometers inside Castile, the Portuguese and Castilian armies met yet again, which led to another Portuguese victory, but this time with very high casualties on both sides. King João's dream of becoming King of Portugal was thrown out the window, and with that, Portugal's independence was secured. Some months after the battle, the Master of Aviz issued a decree ruling that all property of the Portuguese nobleman who had supported Castile would become his own. This would normally have been very controversial, but with the patriotic and anti-Castilian spirits at an all-time high, it nearly went unnoticed. In the next decades, these properties would be given as a reward to the nobleman who had fought on his side against Castile. In May 1386, the Master of Aviz signed a brand new alliance with England and married the Duke of Lancaster's first daughter, Philippa. This alliance led to the Portuguese navy's help in defending the southern coast of England from French and Castilian ships. Various Anglo-Portuguese campaigns were also fought in northern Castile, but with no real success, ending with England finally making peace with Castile in 1387. Portugal, however, would be at war with Castile for further 24 years. No big battles were fought during this period, due to the Castilian economy being at an all-time low and the population tired of war, and Portugal having the same issues, though not as extreme. Small skirmishes at the border still happened here and there, of course. In 1411, a peace treaty was signed, formally ending the 3-decade-long war. 4 years later, in 1415, the Master of Aviz conquered Ceuta in Morocco, which marked the very beginning of the Age of Discovery, the golden age of Portuguese history. And with that said, thanks for watching. The various battles mentioned in this video will get their own separate videos, which will go in depth about tactics, persons, etc, etc. If you like this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you want a specific event covered by us, then please say so down in the comments below. Thanks for watching.